Welcome, everyone. I would like to thank the Whitman Public Library for hosting this event and the Whitman Cultural Council for funding it. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions by putting them in the Q&A, and they will be read, and I'll attempt to answer them at the end of the program. On we go. So we acknowledge that we live on land that was managed and inhabited before European colonization. Please take a moment to find your location on the map and honor those whose land we now occupy. And I think it's wise for us to honor the Native American spiritual awareness and sensitivities and sensibilities, because they really were very much in tune with what was happening with the plants and animals around them and had an attitude of respect towards them. So I often begin my programs in person by asking, do you have a green thumb? Do you, raise your hand if you have a green thumb? And some people will put up their hand and some people say, definitely not. But I'm hoping that I'll convince you that anyone can really have a green thumb. A lot of it has to do with the soil. A farmer or a gardener might pick up soil and feel it, smell it, even taste it, and tell right away, this soil is in good heart. And whether or not they're aware of it, they're talking about how soil is teeming with life, 1 billion bacteria in this teaspoon of soil, miles of fungal filaments, thousands of protozoa, scores of nematodes. Here they are, the cast of characters, and even something called actinomycetes, which is just as numerous as bacteria. So the soil food web then all starts with them decomposing the organic matter, and they are eaten by larger animals, which in turn are the base of the soil food web and the entire food web. And I'd like to discuss in particular the fungi, because it's not widely known that plant roots and fungi that are called mycorrhizal fungi are symbiotic. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see in blue, the fungus is actually penetrating the root and moving in between the cells. And on the right-hand side, not only is it penetrating the root, it's actually moving into the cells. These are called arbuscules. So this is an arbuscular mycorrhizal fungus. And oops, I don't want to be here. Okay, glomalin is a soil superglue that is created by some of these arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. And what it does, it enables the fungi to span the gaps between particles in the soil. And it gives the soil it gives the soil a kind of an architecture, which gives it just the right kind of, it aggregates the soil particles and gives it a good tilth, it's called, and it stores carbon. And these microscopic bridges that are being created by the fungi remain, and the carbon just does not decompose. It hangs out for like 7 to 42 years. So it's a very stable form of soil carbon. Who would have known that we're sequestering carbon in the soil like that? It's not just trees and shrubs and plants that do that. Fungi do it as well. So what they're doing is they are actually being fed by the plant roots. They're photosynthate. So what are they doing for the roots in return? Delivering water and nutrients like nobody's business. It's amazing how many, because if you think about the amount of surface area that the roots can accomplish, it can reach out in the soil. It's not that great, but the network of the fungi is phenomenal. So the fungi are able to deliver so much more water and nutrients than the roots could ever possibly manage to access. And these fungi also protect the roots from pathogens. So we want to encourage mycorrhizal fungi. And there are 2 things to do. Don't add manure or fertilizer with phosphorus unless necessary, and also minimize digging, especially rototilling. Now let's talk about rototilling for a minute, because it's kind of a tradition that we almost assume this is how we have to start our garden every year, but it causes compaction due to settling. It causes tiller pan just below where the tines reach. It's going to glaze the surface and make it difficult for the roots to get past that layer. It ruins the soil structure and destroys worm tunnels. It consumes soil nutrients because you're bringing all those nutrients to the surface and they can be oxidized. It inverts soil, displacing bacteria, fungi, and earthworms. They don't end up where they want to be. And perhaps worst of all, it exposes weed seeds and invites them to grow. So there are a lot of benefits to no-till gardening: less labor, soil microbes thrive, prevent soil compaction, conserve soil organic matter, conserve soil moisture. And this is not the only, rototilling is not the only cause of soil compaction by any means, but it's one of the major causes of limitation of plant growth in landscaping. So compacted soil simply means that there's not enough moisture or air available to the roots. You can test for soil compaction, by the way. Dig a 1 cubic foot hole and fill it with water, and then wait for that water to infiltrate through the soil. Fill it again 2 hours later. If your second infiltration takes over 45 minutes to happen, and you don't have a very clayey soil to begin with, you likely have a soil compaction problem. You can also just bury a perforated coffee can and fill it up. And if it drains faster than 1 inches per hour, then you're good. And another easy way is straightening a wire hanger, plunging it into the ground and moving it. And if it moves to a depth of 1 foot without bending, then that indicates good porosity as well. So the causes of compaction include, both the original construction when all that heavy equipment was passing over the soil, and also when cars or even people repeatedly are passing over the landscape, and when people are too eager to get into their gardens in the wet spring and just compacting. When the soil is so wet, it's so easy to get compacted that way. Remedies for soil compaction include growing this mammoth radish called a daikon radish. It provides soil cover, scavenges nutrients, suppresses weeds, and it alleviates compaction or remedies it by drilling holes in the soil. So whether you harvest those radishes or not, it has accomplished that purpose. Also consider that cover crops might help to remedy soil compaction. And you might need to add compost and mix it. Actually, it depends a lot on what you're going to use the land for. A lawn doesn't need that much, but if you're planting shrubs and trees, you're going to want to alleviate the compaction down to even 2 or 3 feet. So you might need to add a lot of compost and then mix it in with the soil. Broad fork is another physical way to poke holes in the soil and give it some aeration. So microhabitats need to be need to be considered when you are surveying your property. Notice how much sunlight hits different parts of your property, and full sun is described as 6 hours or more. Moisture and drainage is also an issue. Does it drain easily or not? Soil texture has to do with the amount of sand, silt, or clay, and the just right combination of those three would be loam, which is usually preferable. This is a diagram of soil texture, and you can see that the loam is that sweet spot right in the middle. So you don't want more than 40% clay, or you're in trouble. But having said that, there are a lot of plants that do handle soil texture that leans towards the clay end, and some that handle sandy soil okay. So you can test for soil texture by adding a small amount of water to a small handful of soil and working to form a bolus or a sphere of a ball of soil. And when it just glistens, that's just right. And then you squeeze that bolus between your thumb and forefinger to form a ribbon, and notice how long it is. Yeah, if it gets really long, it's clay soil. And if you can't hardly do one at all, it's sandy soil. And there's another kind of a much more refined approach that it's called the soil texture testing 2 simple methods. You go to this website and you'll learn more about it. But so the ribbon test, there's that loam right in the middle, the just right soil. A sandy loam or loamy sand would be a smaller ribbon, and the clay is obviously longer. You can also test for soil texture by putting a small amount of soil, 2 inches of soil in a quart jar, adding a teaspoon of powdered dishwasher detergent or borax or calgon, add water to within 2 inches of the top, shake it for 5 minutes, and then sit back and wait for as long as a week until that settles. The clay at the top will take longer to settle, and finally when the water is clear, then you can measure and compare the levels of those 3 sand, silt, and clay. The sand, of course, will be at the bottom, the silt in the middle, and the clay on top. Soil pH is relevant and important because the more acidic or the more basic or alkaline the soil is, the less available nutrients are. You can see that in the nitrogen at the top as an example of, when it gets to quite acidic or quite alkaline, the nitrogen becomes less available. So you can test soil pH with a simple soil tester like this that you can buy at a nursery. A very simple soil test. If you add baking soda to damp soil, it'll fizz, and if you add if you add vinegar to soil and it fizzes, it's alkaline. Here's a fun way to get a little bit more color and a little bit more refinement to your test. If you simmer some red cabbage leaves and then use that water, just put a couple of teaspoons of garden soil in that cabbage water and wait 20 to 30 minutes and check the color against these color comparison test tubes here. So you can do laboratory soil testing, send a soil sample according to their specifications. There's a soil and plant nutrient testing laboratory at UMass Amherst, ag.umass.edu is the website there. And these are some of the things that you can ascertain from that test. Now, if you're ready to plant and you want to avoid that, the whole idea of no-till gardening, well, this is the alternative to using a rototiller or a spade or anything. You just don't need to dig at all. Smother the land, smother the area you want to transition to a garden with either cardboard or 6 thicknesses of newspaper, 6 sheets of newspaper, and overlap them. You can use something called ramboard. You can buy a roll of that cardboard that painters use to lay down on the floor before they paint. And that'll do the trick too. And so if you have a hard time accessing enough material to put down, and once you put it down, if you're doing vegetable gardening, you might want to get some compost on top and then the mulch. But for a lot of plants, including the shrubs and trees that I'll talk about in this presentation, you'd be fine with just adding mulch, because you can assume that in many cases that at least the soil is fertile enough the way it is. And benefits of mulch include suppressing weeds, keeping the soil moist and cool, and enriching the soil. And here for your annual beds, your choices for mulch would include grass clippings, straw, shredded leaves, and pine needles, also called pine straw. It's a myth that pine needles make the soil acidic, incidentally. So you could also use shredded leaves and pine straw for perennial beds, although shredded leaves will decompose fairly quickly. Pine bark, sawdust, wood chips, and chip branch wood are also options for perennial beds. Please avoid dyed mulch. It's often contaminated with creosote and CCA, the wood that is used to make that dyed mulch. And please don't do the volcano mulching, which is illustrated here. That will induce the roots to grow out of the trunk, which they shouldn't. It's not at all healthy for them to do that, because then as the mulch decomposes, those roots will be exposed. So now here is a raised bed that you could think of it as a sheet mulching on steroids, if you will, because it's different layers that at the bottom you would put logs and branches, and then bury them with either soil or organic matter. And one advantage is that you don't need to irrigate it, because there's the moisture just gets absorbed by that wood and it never dries out. You also will have a heated bed. The heat rises from that decomposition. And so here's another illustration of these raised beds. You can dig a trough first, but that's not necessary. So permaculture is called, David Holmgren is the fellow who coined the term, consciously designed landscapes that mimic the patterns and relationships found in nature, while yielding an abundance of food, fiber, and energy for provision of local needs. So if you think about mimicking nature, nature never plants things in straight rows, and you also find a lot of plants intermixed, such as the tall trees, smaller trees, shrubs, and permaculture. A permaculture approach to agriculture has an emphasis on perennials that don't have to be, so you don't have to keep on working the soil or preparing the soil every year and starting from scratch. So multiple plant functions are encouraged when you consider the plants that you want to establish. In other words, you might be wanting plants for food or drink, but also if they offer medicinal value or wildlife benefit, they might be good for pollinators and insectary. They might fix nitrogen. They might serve as a hedgerow or timber. So that's the kind of philosophy involved with permaculture. Now, edible landscaping can be accomplished even in such a small area as this. And you can see how beautiful it is, and it's functionally effective, and a lot of different plants will fit in there. And prolonged harvest is a characteristic of edible landscaping with perennials, because some of those you can harvest in the early spring on many occasions, such as the perennial onions and some vegetables that are ready to go much sooner than garden vegetables would be. And likewise, there's some fruits that can be harvested late into the season. You'll get a wide spectrum of tastes and nutrients from your edible landscaping. It'll be resistant to pests, weather conditions, and other stresses more than plants in a traditional vegetable garden. It can be tremendously productive, and ultimately requires much less labor and resources than annual vegetable gardens where you have to start from scratch each year. There might be an investment up front, but once you have things going, ideally, there'll be a minimal amount of inputs and labor involved in future years. So here's an example of a permaculture setup of edible landscaping on 1/10 of an acre in downtown Holyoke, Massachusetts. And as you can see, people are really excited about this approach to landscaping. So when you think about a site selection, 6+ hours a day is optimal. You want to fill in or avoid standing water. South-facing slope, it would be ideal, but southwest or east, or and for that matter, if the slope is gradual and it wouldn't really be that consequential, you might want to test for soil type, pH, nutrients, drainage. Also, simply observing how other plants are already doing in that spot will give you a lot of information about whether those would be of concern. You want to have an open area for air circulation, but some wind protection as well, which can be provided by windbreak or trellises. And you want your garden beds to be near your dwelling, near a water source, and near a compost bin, so that you don't have to do a lot of traveling to and fro. And you don't want your beds to be too near or to be in the path where humans and animals will walk. Now, once you've selected the trees or shrubs that you want, and you're ready to put one in the ground, dig a hole at about twice as wide as you might think necessary. The reason for that is that the roots are going to be traveling and growing in a lateral direction rather than down. That's because the nutrients and water are much more abundant near the surface. So roots typically grow out, and by digging a wide hole, you're making it easier for them to do that. And resist the temptation to put some compost in there for extra fertility, because the roots will be inclined just to stay in that area, and they won't be motivated, if you will, to keep growing out of the circular area that you've dug, if there's that extra fertility there. And then return the subsoil and then the topsoil to fill the hole. It's a good idea to put mulch around the tree or shrub, and you can make a rim, if you like, to hold the water when it rains or when you irrigate it. And you will want to watch it for during prolonged periods of drought, at least for the first couple of years until they're established. So avoid coarsely textured mulches. You don't need 7 inches anywhere, and certainly not next to a tree. And you might want to have the mulch all the way out to the drip line. So let's get on with the show with nut trees and shrubs. I want to call your attention to 2 wonderful organizations, the Northern Nut Growers Association and the Society of Ontario Nut Growers, SONG. That's songonline.ca because they're a Canadian website. Chinese chestnut, what a wonderful tree this is. You do need at least 2 for cross-pollination. Sweet nuts with many culinary possibilities. It's drought tolerant. It can grow in highly acid and infertile soils, infertile dry sands, and huge crop at maturity from mature trees up to 50, 55 pounds of nuts, and they are delicious. Of course, that's well known by squirrels. So what some people do is knock the nuts out of the trees before they're quite falling, and bring them inside and let them cure and in protection from squirrel depredations. So it'll take 5 to 7 years for you to get that kind of yield. This is a manageable size tree. It only gets to about 40 feet tall, which is a good size, but it's not the gargantuan tree that some, for example, the black walnut, this incredible, majestic tree that most of us don't have the room to devote to a tree like this. These walnut kernels are delicious. They have to be dried before you crack the nut open, and it's a difficult nut to crack. You really have to smash it with a hammer. But there isn't that much kernel for all that effort. And another drawback with black walnut, it actually inhibits the growth of other plants near it. It secretes juglone from its roots, which is called allelopathy. There are some other trees that do this too. The northern maple, the sycamore maple, tree of heaven. English walnut, some varieties are hardy to zone 5, unlikely to produce well due to frosts and other factors, according to one source I read. So I would do some research before I plant English walnut here in New England to find out, because I don't know anyone who's doing it successfully, but theoretically it's possible to do. And here's some more of those allelopathic trees that I mentioned: Norway maple, sycamore maple, and tree of heaven. Now let's consider heart nut, which is a Japanese walnut. Sweet nuts, ripens in September, requires full sun, rich sandy soil with good drainage, and it's a manageable size tree, only gets 20 to 30 feet tall. So this is a good alternative to those black walnuts, or to this butternut tree, which is also a huge tree, and also has nuts that are very difficult to crack open, and you don't get much for your effort. So a Bwart nut is a cross between the butternut and the heart nut. Hybrid vigor is one of its assets. Disease resistance, heavy bearing, superior hardiness, and it's resistant to the butternut canker that plagues the butternut tree. It grows to about 40 feet tall. And you'll see a picture here of what a Bwart nut looks like compared to an English walnut. Shellbark hickory is another one of those very tall trees in the New England forests. I love shellbark hickories. They're sweet tasting with maple syrup overtones. But again, it's not a practical tree to plant for most people in their yards if they have limited space. Northern pecan is an example also of an incredibly large tree. It would take, if you have an acre, you could fit 4 pecan trees in it, and that would pretty much take care of that 1 acre. So it would have to be a northern pecan for New England, and the nuts are certainly delicious and they're easily cracked. Now here's a hicon, a cross between a hickory and pecan. Hickory nut flavor, easily shelled, height to 50 to 70 feet, still a big tree. And swamp white oak, it's worth considering oak trees, and Native Americans made use of acorns for a staple. And the swamp white oak and the other white oaks have the advantage of nuts that are low in tannin. Tannin is a kind of a bitter substance that has to be leached out of acorns to make them palatable. If you're harvesting, say, red or black oak acorns. So they have 8% protein, low in fat, complex carbohydrates, high mineral content. They have fibers, so they are an important nutrient source. A hardy almond, what a beautiful ornamental hardy almond is. It looks just like a peach, and in fact, if you look at the fruit, that does look like a peach without the fruit inside, because it's being grown for the seed, which is the almond. So it's ornamental, has sweet to slightly bitter nuts, and if you roast or salt the kernels, that will remove the bitterness. It's a medium-sized tree to 20 feet tall. And it grows where peaches thrive, which makes sense. Korean nut pine. This is a very tall tree. It's a conifer. And if you're thinking about multiple functions, well, a conifer planted to the north of your property might save you on your energy bill, because it would serve as a screen, blocking the north wind. So these are the pine nuts that you pay an arm and a leg for in the grocery store. And you can grow your own. It takes a while, though, for that tree to get to maturity, and it thrives wherever white pine can grow. Hazelnut is a shrub that not very many people need an introduction to what a hazelnut tastes like. Just delicious for eating raw or using it in baked goods. Very nutritious. Thrives in a variety of soil types. So you can plant hazelnut in situations where virtually nothing else will grow. Maybe on rocky slopes, or and they don't take up a lot of room. You do need to have at least 2 varieties, maybe more, for cross-pollination. So it would pay to do your homework there about the varieties, because there are many to choose from. Now let's move on to the fruit course. And a mulberry tree is very popular with birds, and I understand why, because I love them too. This is a fruit that I've never harvested mulberries and brought them home and cooked with them. I always just eat them as a snack. But it really is very attractive to birds, and it's wonderful to watch how many birds will flock to this tree and visit them. Now let's think about Chinese mulberry, a tree that's quite unfamiliar to most Americans. The flavor is a blend of ripe fig, mulberry, persimmon, and even cantaloupe. You would need a cross-pollination, or actually a male tree that would pollinate the female. And it's a drought-tolerant tree, and it only gets to 6 to 20 feet tall. There are spines in the taller branches. So I wish I could pass out samples of this fruit. I haven't tasted it myself yet, but it sounds quite intriguing. The persimmon, I can give personal testimony about. I used to live in North Carolina, and the American persimmon is native to the South. It also grows in the Midwest to a certain extent. That Latin name Diospyros literally translated as fruit of the gods. And it really is deliciously sweet. You don't want to eat a fruit that looks like the one in the lower left of this slide. It's not ripe yet. You have to let it get to what it looks like in the upper left. That photo where the leaves have all dropped, but those persimmons can hang in there into the winter, even December and even January. And so you can be harvesting this tropical tasting fruit in New England in the middle of winter. It's incredibly delicious, incredibly nutritious. So I think of myself as Johnny Persimmon Seed in terms of, wanting to sing the praises of this tree and encouraging people to establish it. It's absolutely delicious, beautiful in all seasons. Persimmon, by the way, is the most popular fruit in the world because there are different species that grow in different places. And so many people in China eat persimmons that it has earned that rank of the most popular fruit. Now, cherry trees can get quite tall, and that's no problem for birds, but it is a difficult situation for people to get those cherries. So most of us would do better planting dwarf cherry trees. And there are both sweet cherries and sour cherries, which are good for cooking. Some sour cherries are also good to be eaten out of hand. And this particular species will grow to 20 feet tall. And then there's the Nanking cherry, which is a shrub, medium tart and very good to eat, makes good juice and wonderful jelly, is what I see on the internet. Beautiful tree, a beautiful shrub rather. So why have an ornamental that gives you nothing if you can have an ornamental that's an edible? And I've heard these called edimentals, if they're edible and ornamental. What a beautiful edimental this one is. It's an even smaller shrub. They're called bush cherries, and the varieties are called Joy, Jan, and Joel. They taste almost exactly like cranberries, although a bit sweeter, and they make a very good cranberry type sauce or jam. And here is a tree that's actually a dogwood. Cornus is the dogwood genus, but it's called the cornelian cherry or the sorbet tree. And in countries where this is, where it's part of the culinary culture, it's extensively used and highly prized. I live in Amherst, Massachusetts, and there's one of these trees growing right behind our public library. Luxuriously floral sweetness. The fruits are used for syrups, puddings, drinks, and confections. Notice also a beautiful tree in the spring with those yellow blossoms, even before the leaves are out. A quince is a tree that perhaps more people are familiar with, a fairly small tree, only gets to 25 feet tall. A very strong taste, and no one will take a bite of a quince just for fun. They are strongly aromatic, and they need to be cooked to be eaten. And typically, they're used in combination with apples to give flavor to those apple dishes. Quince is also a fruit that has a lot of pectin. So if you want to add some quince to various fruits to make jelly, that will help them to gel. And quince is resistant to pests and diseases, much more so than apples are, than apple trees. Flowering quince is actually a different, instead of a tree, it's a shrub. It grows to 10 feet tall. But the fruit can be used for in similar ways to the quince that we were just talking about. And then there are apples, and it's understandable why apples are so popular, and yet most home orchards, apples can be challenging. There are a lot of diseases and pests that you might have to deal with apples. Consider something like the Liberty, which is an attractive fruit that does not need to be sprayed. It has a tart and sweet flavor. Other varieties with good disease resistance include the Jonafree, the Priscilla, Honeycrisp, Crimson Crisp, Topaz, Pristine, Williams Pride, Enterprise, Gold Rush, Freedom, and Red Free. And here's an apple called Cox's Orange Pippin, combining complex hints of pear, melon, orange, and mango. And the orchardist Jonathan Inglesby, who lives in Dartmouth, grows this apple among many others. And he's able to be an organic orchardist by one of the things he does is he interplants with, we saw the mulberry tree. He has that. He has the spice bush that's seen on the left, sassafras tree seen on the right. And these are trees and shrubs that invite beneficial insect predators. The European pear is the pear that we're familiar with, that we buy from the store, and we often grow European pear trees. You do need a pollinizer, a different variety or a different individual, so they'll cross-pollinate, and the height can get to 45 feet unless you're getting a dwarf tree. Pears, as you well know, have to be picked unripe, and then you let them ripen inside. And once they're ripe, you have to eat them pretty quick. Even if you put them in the refrigerator, they just won't keep that long in most cases. However, the Magnus pear is an exception. This pear, which has an excellent buttery flavor and is fire blight resistant, will keep for 4 months. It is slow to bear, and it will need another pollinizer of a different variety to pollinate it. And consider this dessert pear, the Seckel or sugar pear, which is super sweet, spicy, aromatic. These are small pears. They're almost bite-sized. They're so small. Again, good fire blight resistance. Self-pollinating, you only have to get one tree. The fruit ripens on the tree. It gets only 15 feet tall. You don't need a lot of space for this one. And truly a taste sensation, the sugar pear. Now, you might have tasted Asian pears before, and they are neither pears nor apples. They're a unique fruit that often called salad pears. They can be eaten raw or cooked. They can be eaten fresh picked. You don't have to bring them in to ripen them. They are not frost tender. They often keep longer than European pears too. And the height of this tree gets to be about 45 feet tall. So this is an excellent selection for America because of its disease resistance relative to apples and the productivity. You might want to prune or pick some of the flowers so that there aren't too many fruits in one cluster. Otherwise, they'll just be too crowded. And the peach is quite a quite good selection here in New England. The Red Haven, Canadian Harmony, and Reliance, in particular, are hardy in most of the state. Companions that you might want to plant with your peach tree, tansy and garlic, which protect it from peach leaf curl. But I'm not sure what's going to protect those peaches from squirrels or other animals that will bite them before they're even ripe. But there's no question that this is a beautiful tree, and it grows to 15 to 20 feet tall. American plum is a native plum. The fruit can be eaten raw or cooked or dried. It's a small tree. It gets to be about 20 feet tall. And then there's the beach plum, which is found on the Cape. It can tolerate sandy soils, but it will also grow fine in normal soil. Again, these are small plums. They can be eaten raw or cooked. The beach plum preserves are famous on the Cape, and it gets to be about 10 feet tall. The fruits are different colors when they're ripe, and it's an excellent plant for pollinators as well. I've seen beach plums just alive with insects when it's in flower. Now, the European plum is the one that's most commonly used for drying to make prunes. These grow to be about 35 feet tall, but it's the Japanese plums that are the ones we typically buy at the grocery store. They're sweet and juicy. You have to grow 2 varieties for cross-pollination. They're precocious, disease-resistant, and vigorous. The height is only to about 15 feet tall. And the lifespan of one of these trees can be almost indefinite if the old wood is removed and the new shoots are allowed to mature, but otherwise plums are not very long-lived. The Juneberry is one of my favorite fruits. They're small, but they are so delicious. I would say they're just as good tasting as blueberries. So it's a small tree, a native tree found on the margins of woods where there's enough sun for them. The fruit does taste like a combination of blueberries and almonds. Birds love them as well. It's beautiful in the spring and also offers flowers for pollinators. The pawpaw, American custard apple. This is a tropical family of fruits, and it's fairly common down south. It also grows in the Midwest, but it is also hardy here in New England. It just hasn't made it up here on its own. But if you give it a place, it will grow, and it will survive New England winters. And the taste is phenomenal. I knew a landscaper once who had traveled the world, and he had tried all kinds of different exotic fruits. And and he told me his favorite was the cherimoya. Well, when I gave him a taste of pawpaw, he said, "Pawpaw is now my favorite fruit." And it tastes like banana combined with mango, pineapple, melon, berries, or other fruit. You don't eat the seeds, you don't eat the skin. And just looking at the fruit, you wouldn't know how delicious it was. A big green, odd-shaped fruit just doesn't seem that appealing, but just wait until you taste it. And this is a fall ripening fruit. You can harvest them in October, or they'll just drop to the ground, and you'll know that they're ready at that point. It's a fly-pollinated tree, incidentally. You do need to have at least 2 for cross-pollination. Many people actually pollinate the flowers manually with a moist toothbrush, delivering the pollen from a flower on one tree to the flower of a different tree, just to make sure that every flower gets pollinated. They're just going for maximum production. So consider the pawpaw. Also, the young trees might need some shade for the first couple of years, but after that, they're just fine. It's a shade-tolerant tree, but the production will be much larger, much more substantial yield in the sunshine. Now, here's an unusual fruit from the Orient. It's called the hardy orange, and it's a legitimate citrus fruit that can be grown. It is hardy. It grows in similar climates in China, and it's a thorny tree. It gets to be almost 20 feet tall, so you could use it as a hedge. Nothing is going to penetrate this tree. And those oranges are yellow, they're small, and they're no more edible than a lemon or a lime is in terms of eating it like an orange. You just wouldn't. But just like lemons and limes, you can make a delicious juice out of them. Just take that pulp and add some water, and there you go, hardy orangeade. But this is not the most popular hardy orange. It's this variety, a dwarf flying dragon hardy orange, it's called, because it's you can see how the claws, rather the thorns, are curved, and so they look a little bit like a dragon's claws. and again, the fruits can be made into a refreshing drink, or you can make marmalade out of them. And I don't have to tell you, this is an exceptionally ornamental tree, very popular. It gets to be no more than 7 feet tall, but it makes a statement even in the winter. And incidentally, there it is on the lower right. Those fruits are ripe in November, so that's when the harvest is, the flying dragon hardy orange harvest. Coosa dogwood has edible fruits. I'll be candid and say that I don't care for them that much, but some people like them. And hardy fig, most of us would consider to be delicious. Unfortunately, it does need protection in winter. It gets to be a small tree if it's allowed to. One way that people keep it alive is by growing it in a pot and then moving that plant indoors or into the garage, someplace where it won't be quite as bitter cold as it would be if it was outside in the elements. Other people, and this is an Italian custom, digging a trench on one side of that, and then on the opposite side, cutting the roots so that it'll be possible to lean that whole plant into the trench, wrap the branches up so it'll fit in there, and then insulate the plant with a pile of leaves maybe, or some soil or burlap, or some way to keep it closer to the temperature of the soil than it would be otherwise. And then in the spring, they let those branches back up and allow the tree to continue to grow. Nothing as delicious as a fresh fig. Autumn olive is, first thing I have to say about it, this is an invasive shrub, and you absolutely do not want to plant it on your property. And if it's already growing there, you really should take it out if at all possible. But since it's here, and since you're likely to find autumn olive once you recognize it, those speckled red fruits that are ripe in as late as October or November, even into December, they are delicious. You can make a fruit sauce out of them, and you can dry that fruit sauce and make a fruit leather that's sweet and very high in lycopene, much higher than tomatoes. So it's nutritious as well. However, it's a nitrogen fixing shrub, and it just outcompetes so many of our native shrubs and vegetation that we need to treat it like the invasive that it is. But the good news is that there's a close cousin, the gumi or cherry silverberry, that is not native and has fruits that are also delicious. Pleasant acidic taste mixed with other fruit in pies, tarts, and jam. Very rich source of vitamins A, C, and E, flavonoids, lycopene, good source of fatty acids. This is also a nitrogen fixing shrub, gets to be about 10 feet tall. You might have to give it some protection, put a net over it if you don't want the birds to eat them all. You might be familiar with the goji berries that are sold, or the dried fruits are sold often at health food stores. There's no question that this is a superfruit, but I would say that virtually every other fruit we've considered so far is also a superfruit in terms of its health properties. So this is a shrub that's related to tomato, actually. It's in that Solanaceae family. Seaberry, this is another Chinese plant. And if you're in China, you might have a glass of seaberry juice instead of orange juice. Siberian pineapple is another common name. The fruit is used for juice and blender drinks, incredibly healthy, as you can see, the details listed here. And it's a shrub that grows to be about 20 feet tall. It's thorny. It might be somewhat not invasive, but aggressive in terms of a spreader. But there's certain things, there's advantages in some ways to a plant that's willing and ready to spread, so you'll have more of them. Honeyberry is an unusual small shrub that almost only to 6 feet tall or so. It can grow far to the north into Siberia. It's incredibly cold tolerant. Canadian farmers are growing these honeyberries to provide fruit for the market in Japan, because Japanese population really loves them. So a taste of wild blueberries, then something tangy. And once more, no question that it's a superfruit. Currants and gooseberries are traditional European shrub, very shade tolerant. That's one of their advantages. They can be grown where few other fruits can be grown and still give you a yield. Although, like most plants, the yield will be even better out in the sun. No question, this is also a superfood in terms of nutrition. And it's also, but it's because it's a vector for white pine blister rust disease, it is not allowed in these towns. And it seems that Whitman is not one of them, so you can rest easy if you want to consider establishing a gooseberry or a gooseberry or currant shrub or two or three. This is one of my favorite plants, elderberries. The fruit can be eaten, cooked, or dried. I like to put elderberries in pancakes or put them in my hot cereal. So anytime you cook with them, you're bringing out the flavor. Very high in vitamin C, very healthy, definitely a superfruit. And elderberry syrup, I wouldn't be without it, especially through the winter. I have my elderberry syrup in the refrigerator ready to go in case I feel like I'm coming down with the flu, and it usually beats it right back. Or if I have the flu, I'll recover a lot quicker with this elderberry syrup. It's a great shrub for birds. It's a native shrub, and the pollinators love the flowers as well. Aronia is called black chokeberry, the Latin name black chokeberry, but it's not choke cherry, so it's somewhat confusing. It's not a cherry at all. It's a shrub, and people plant it as an ornamental. And the fruits are incredibly, and often people are not aware that they have an edible fruit on their hands, but edible it is. The fruit is used in baking juice, syrups. Just like the elderberry, it doesn't taste that great when you pick it right off the shrub, but when you cook with it, the flavor really comes out. And it's an amazingly healthy plant. Put this aronia in your mind as something that you want to. Aronia melanocarpa is actually a native here in the United States, and Russians appreciate it enough to establish it there, and then develop new varieties, and then those varieties came back to America. So it's been appreciated all over the world. Blueberries, no one needs to be introduced to this fruit, either the low bush or high bush. And the high bush is the one that's grown for the market here. It requires acidic soil, pH of 4.5 to 5.2 to do well. It's a shrub that grows to be about 6 feet tall, and I would consider it to be an ornamental, just stunningly beautiful foliage in the fall. And there are many varieties of blueberry. You can, if you want to be harvesting blueberries for an extended period of time, you want to get a combination of early ripening, mid ripening, and late ripening varieties. The cranberry is, you can think of it as a ground cover. It does not need a bog to grow. It can grow in normal soil, although it will appreciate acidic soil, less than pH 5. Rich in vitamin C. So this is actually a potential ground cover. And those fruits are available late into the year. I remember harvesting some in January. The lingonberry from Sweden, very popular in Sweden where it's native. They make lingonberry preserves. So the fruits are, once again, look down the list. Another superfruit nutritionally. This one also requires acidic soil. You can tell the flowers are by the flowers that it's in the heath family. So just like the blueberries, it's an acid-loving plant. Incredibly, the fruits can be kept for months at room temperature in jars of water. That's hard to conceive of, that the fruit wouldn't spoil just being kept submerged in water. Or you could stir it with a small amount of sugar, no cooking required. Raspberries come in different colors and varieties. We have the native black raspberry that grows profusely, but there are varieties of black raspberry that are improved in terms of taste and size. The Bristol is one of them. And I also have the Royalty, the purple one, and Anne, one of the yellow ones, and the Caroline, one of the reds, just representative varieties of different colored raspberry canes. The blackberry it has been improved to be the thornless variety called Chester is the one that's hardy here in Massachusetts. Large sweet berries, early harvest, semi-erect, and thornless is what the information says. I'm not quite sure if the berries are really as good tasting as our wild blackberries, but there's no question that they are easier to pick without those vicious thorns that our wild blackberries have. And strawberries come in different varieties as well. They are the two different categories are the day neutral, which would be on raised beds, and the June bearers in a matted row. And so just a line of June bearers or a staggered row of two rows for the day neutral. I would welcome you to go to extension.unh.edu to learn more about growing strawberries. It would not be advisable to just dig up your lawn and go ahead and plant some strawberries there. It takes a while to establish a strawberry bed if you don't want to be fighting the weeds. And there are some culinary delights. This is the Mara des Bois, rated as the highest flavor and fragrance of any variety by Norse Farms. Dave's Garden says it's as close to perfection as I've ever found. So consider this as a dessert fruit served in classy French restaurants. Planted in the spring, it'll produce fruit during the summer into the fall. The following spring, it also produces a good spring crop. The musk strawberry, another crowd pleaser. Intense aroma and superb flavor, a mixture of strawberry, raspberry, and pineapple. And then there's these tiny alpine strawberries, super sweet, just like the wild strawberries. They bear all summer in their attractive ground cover. And then there's the white woodland strawberry. Again, very sweet, a hint of pineapple. This one does not have runners, and it's an excellent ground cover. So there they all are, those four, the Mara des Bois, the musk, the alpine, and the white woodland. Hardy kiwi is a vine. The kiwi fruit that we're familiar with in the grocery stores is much larger, and it has a fuzzy skin that you wouldn't dream of eating. So you don't take a bite of a kiwi. First, you have to peel it. Hardy kiwi is approached entirely differently. You just pop one of these in your mouth, and the sweet flavor just explodes in your mouth. It's incredibly delicious. Delectable is a good adjective to use here. So if you've never tried a hardy kiwi before, I'm going to prepare you for just a wonderful revelation of just how good a fruit can taste. And they're best when they're a little soft. These are vines. You need a male vine to pollinate the females. One male can pollinate, say, 5 or 6 female vines. The vines can get very big. If you think about how a grapevine can get, very sizable trunk that goes way up into the trees. Hardy kiwi can do the same thing. But if you're growing this so that you can sample the fruits, you're going to want to have more of control of where it grows, and you would provide trellises. And it makes sense to do some research when you're setting out, what are the best varieties, what are the best ways to provide that support. But this is another one of those fall ripening fruits, right along with the pawpaw and the persimmon. Those three are the fabulous fall fruits. Kiwis, the hardy kiwis were once considered to be an ornamental, and I suppose they had no idea just how delicious those fruits were, because a small green fruit that you'd heard nothing about. Why would you even taste it? There is a super hardy kiwi that's hardy to minus 40 degrees, and it will ripen in fewer years. The regular hardy kiwi, it might take 7 years before you finally get flowers and fruits, but only takes maybe 3 or 4 years to get fruits from a super hardy kiwi vine. However, I think the regular hardy kiwi tastes better. There are many varieties of grapes. It's difficult to imagine what we're missing, because the supermarkets might have 3 or 4 different varieties, but they likely won't have the Steuben or the Himrod. I think these are 2 of the best. And this is another whole a topic of how to grow grapes, how to prune them, how to support them. that I trust you to do your own independent research about. Schisandra, sandraberry, Chinese magnolia vine, also called a 5-flavor fruit, Schisandra chinensis from China. An amazing vine, an amazing fruit. One botanically curious thing about this is that one of those clusters of fruits actually comes from a single flower. How that happens botanically, I have no idea. But boy, is this a super fruit. Athletes are familiar with Schisandra because, as you can see in the first 2 lines, it increases physical performance and endurance. And if even half of these are true, we would do well to plant Schisandra and know about its benefits. So I encourage you to keep this one in your mind. Rugosa rose, or Japanese rose, is found growing wild on the Cape. Those rose hips are delicious. There's a lot of seeds in them. You can make rosehip preserves. You can make rosehip tea. You can even eat the flowers. And it's a beautiful ornamental besides. Now, on to the perennial vegetables. When people think about perennial vegetables, they think perhaps first and foremost asparagus. And asparagus beds, I think one thing that perhaps is not that well known is that this plant does grow in the wild, and in the middle of the summer, it looks like a tall, feathery plant. The leaves don't look anything like what you expect leaves to look like. They look more like fuzzy pine needles. So it's an unusual plant. But every year, those stalks will come up and they'll be more substantial than the year before, unless they're harvested too much. So again, there's a lot of literature out there about how to grow asparagus. And another one that's quite familiar to folks is rhubarb. It's the stems that are used in cooking, not the leaves. I think the leaves are actually poisonous. And ostrich fern, a wild plant that you can cultivate. You can grow ostrich fern. In the wild, it's grown. It is found in moist places and along seasonally flooded areas along riverbanks. But you can grow ostrich fern in more normal soil. These fiddleheads, that you can saute them. They taste delicious, almost like tree ear mushrooms, even savory or meaty. So you can recognize the ostrich fern in the wild by the fertile frond that you see here in the lower right of the slide. Notice it's very characteristic the way it branches, and the branches are kind of angled in an upward direction. The fiddleheads in the upper left-hand corner, incidentally, there's this brownish scale that has been rubbed off of those fiddleheads. They don't look like that when you find them in the wild. Now, the Jerusalem artichoke is a very tall, think of it as a sunflower, and it is in the same family. Those flowers, incidentally, are blooming in October, so they provide a valuable resource for a late blooming flower for pollinators. And the tuber is edible. It's the common name is somewhat curious because it doesn't come from Jerusalem and it's not an artichoke, but there's a whole story behind that. Some people like to call them sunchokes. The tubers can be boiled, fresh, or roasted, fried or roasted. They taste slightly nutty and savory, like a cross between an artichoke heart and the best potato you've ever had. I suggest that you harvest your sunchoke tubers in the spring rather than the fall, because they're sweeter then. They're getting ready to sprout, and they're also less likely to give you flatulence, which is the reaction that some people have to eating these sunchokes. I consider them to be delicious, and you can think of it as a tall ground cover. If you define a ground cover as a plant that will not tolerate anything growing underneath it, that nothing can grow beneath this plant, that is the case with a sunchoke patch. It's just pure sunchoke, nothing else. Solomon seal, and there is something called giant Solomon seal. will give you shoots in the spring that are edible. They taste like asparagus with a cucumber flavor. I would not harvest them from the wild because they're fairly rare in the wild, but you can grow them and eat them to your heart's content. I've never tasted this plant, cordate spikenard, also called udo. Young shoots can be eaten in spring. This plant requires moisture and likes partial shade, and it gets quite tall, as you can see. Hostas are edible. Who would have thought? We are surrounded by these edible plants, and we plant them as ornamentals, and we're totally ignoring them as a food source. So in the spring, and of course, spring is about to spring on us. Keep your eyes open for those shoots of hostas, and go ahead and bring them into the kitchen. Put them on your cutting board and treat them out like a vegetable. It's a Japanese mountain vegetable. The young shoots taste like snow pea pods, asparagus, lettuce, and spinach. And I'm sure that any variety would be edible. Spiderwort, common garden flower. It's great for pollinators. Not well known that the young shoots and leaves can be chopped and added to salads, soups, and stews. The flowers can be eaten raw. They make an attractive edible garnish. I'd like to share this website, PFAF, Plants for a Future. So if you visit PFAF and then do a search for a particular plant, like the one you just saw, the spiderwort, it'll give you information, edibility rating, other uses, weed potential, medicinal rating, what care it would require, that sort of thing. An amazing plant with very large leaves, the Japanese butterbur, also called sweet coltsfoot or fuki. The stalks can be rolled against a cutting board with salt to loosen the skin and reduce the bitterness, and then they are boiled, and there you have a vegetable. There's a wild coltsfoot that doesn't look anything like this, that's native to New England, with yellow flowers. The flowers look a little bit like dandelions. Good King Henry is a close relative of lamb's quarters, which is one of my favorite edible wild plants. Lamb's quarters is an annual, but Good King Henry is a perennial. So the taste, they are close relatives. They're both similar to spinach, and they both are relatives of spinach. The young flowers can be cooked like broccoli, but it's the leaves that I would be most likely to use. And the seeds can be used like poppy seeds if you like. Lovage, think of lovage as a tall and very savory celery. The flavor is like parsley and celery combined with a hint of aniseed and curry. And bamboo shoots are edible. This is called nude sheath bamboo, Philostachys nuda, but this is not the only species that has edible shoots. Perhaps you're familiar with them in Chinese restaurants as part of a variety of dishes. Aromatic, just cooked shoots taste like artichoke, corn, and hearts of palm. You will have to have a sunny location, and they will form a beautiful grove. You can limit the extent of that grove by mowing around it, or if it grows against the woods, it will not be able to march into the woods. It just gives up in the shade. But don't allow it to march into your neighbor's property. They might not appreciate that. According to Eric Tonesmeyer, who wrote the book Perennial Vegetables, and you remember in the early part of this program, the 10th of an acre in Holyoke that was a permaculture garden, that belongs to Eric Tonesmeyer. So he wrote this book, Perennial Vegetables, an excellent book. And what he says about chicory, and there are some perennial varieties of chicory, the rich, nutty, and bitter flavor of their leaves is a fantastic addition to gourmet mesclun salads and is tasty in many gourmet dishes as well. And the dandelion itself, in my mind, is one of the best perennials out there. And you can select these varieties such as Clio or Ameliore if you want to harvest them and grow them for that purpose. They're delicious, both raw and cooked. They are incredibly nutritious as well. In fact, people have testified that dandelion has saved their life in curing different illnesses. It's great for the liver. It's a pure tonic. It purifies your blood in the spring. Just has a long list of medicinal value, highly valued in the Orient, in China. So if I wasn't finding dandelion in the wild, I would grow it. And it was brought to America on purpose by Britain, by British colonists. Sea kale is a wild plant on the coast of England. And it's incredible that such a lush plant can grow so luxuriantly in non-soil like this, in pebbles on the coast. But grow it does. And that doesn't mean it requires a habitat like that. Just like the beach plum that you can grow in normal soil, that's true with sea kale as well. And a wild food forager in Britain calls it, he says, I place it on a par with seps, scallops, and truffles in the Parthenon of wild food gods. And you can read down the list of things that he says about it's evidently quite a versatile vegetable. It might take a while to establish itself, but once you have it, it'll be giving you harvests every year, a variety of things. Turkish rocket is a perennial vegetable. Think of this as a broccolita, an early broccoli. The flowering heads can be harvested in that way, or you can eat the young leaves, either are cooked, and the older leaves cooked as mustard greens as well. Climbing spinach, Hablitzia, I believe there's even an entire Facebook page for Hablitzia admirers. No other perennial edible is anywhere near as productive so early in the season. So this is a vine that will give you a vegetable early in the year. Common garden sorrel is much appreciated in Europe. They make sorrel soup. They put in their salads. The leaves are tart and lemony and high in nutrients. Groundnut is a Native American plant, and Native Americans ate these tubers and taught the colonists how to use them as well. The tubers are 16% protein. The flavor is slightly nutty. It can be boiled, fried, or roasted. This is a vine. It's in the pea family. Delicious plant, delicious tuber. Salsify is another edible tuber. The leaves are tender with the leaves are also edible. They're tender with a cucumber-like flavor, excellent in salads, and they can be cooked. But the roots taste like artichokes. The roots of skirret are edible, but so are the shoots. So are the leaves. The roots taste like a nutty potato or a mixture of carrot and licorice. Chinese yam, another edible tuber. In fact, there are aerial tubers as well as underground tubers. The aerial tubers, which you'll see in the middle here at the bottom, they grow on that vine. You can just pick them right off. They have a flowery texture and a mild agreeable flavor. And the baked yams themselves that are in the ground, if you can get them out of the ground, you're going to have to do some excavation to get a root like that. But they taste like baked potatoes and crisps. Mint root, a delicacy in Oriental cuisine. This is it is a mint, a perennial that's in the mint family, which is Lamiaceae. You can tell a mint by the square stems, incidentally, and virtually all those mint perennials are excellent pollinator plants as well. So those roots that look like seashells are pleasant, delicate flavor, reminiscent of a mixture of apple, globe artichoke, new potatoes, and water chestnuts. This is an unusual onion. You can see how those bulblets at the tip of the stalk will sprout themselves. So now you have a stalk on top of a stalk, and that which causes the plant just to bend over, and those bulblets at the end of that second stalk are then just going to be able to plant themselves, and that's why it's called the walking onion. It propagates itself vegetatively in that way. So the leaves and stems are used in salads or cooked dishes. They have a strong and hot onion flavor. The bulbs can be used like shallots and have a mild flavor. Welsh onion or spring onion is much more milder, much more delicate. You would, if you're cooking with them, you would add them at the very end because you wouldn't want to destroy the flavor. This is a beautiful plant. I consider it to be an ornamental. It's also very high value as a pollinator plant. The bees love those flowers. Another perennial onion, the multiplier onions, the shallots, potato onions. The bulbs are used as onions. Their leaves and stems are used or are cooked like spring onions. Chives is familiar to many of you, and I'm sure, and beautiful ornamental as well. Young leaves have a mild flavor. They can be used raw or cooked. They can be dried or frozen. Flowers can be used whole in salads. And then there's a large variety of uses for this Chinese chives or garlic chives. Again, the leaves, stems, and flowers are all edible. This is another plant that really can command an area, so you can think of it as a ground cover. It just won't, no other weed will be able to penetrate that stand of garlic onion. How about this one? Garlic itself. Bulbs are a staple culinary ingredient, as you well know. Young green leaves and stems can be used raw in salads or cooked. And in spring, the whole plants can be harvested as baby garlic. My favorite onion of all, the wild leek, also called ramps. It grows in profusion farther south. It does grow here in New England as a wild plant in places. You can eat both the bulbs and the leaves, which don't look at all like onion leaves, but they sure do smell and taste like them. And so the only part of the plant that you wouldn't eat is the roots. Although if you're mindful of not wanting to destroy your wild leek patch, well, you could just sample the leaves and leave the bulbs in the ground to produce more. They have a mild, sweet flavor, used raw or cooked. The whole plant can be used as a spring onion when young, and the bulbs can be pickled. Now, interesting thing about this plant, the leaves will come up in the spring and then they'll die and the plant will vanish. You won't even know that it's there. And it might even seem that the plant has died, but that's just the pattern. It'll do the same thing the next year. The leaves will come up in the early spring. Here are some edible flowers to choose from. Nasturtiums, pansies, the chives and garlic chives I mentioned earlier, marigolds, and calendulas. Wild ginger is a ground cover that can handle dense shade, and the root is used as a seasoning. Now, let's close with considering the permaculture principles. We talked about the idea of permaculture as providing for our nutritional needs without having to put in significant inputs every year. So it's considered to be a sustainable alternative to conventional agriculture. And practitioners of permaculture are urging that we have live by three principles: care for the earth, fair share, and care for people. There is no planet B. Thank you for doing your part. Here is my email address, info@johnroot.net. I would welcome any comments or questions you might have. You can also go to my website, johnroot.net, and you'll find the handout in the program description is a list of the plants that I've discussed in this presentation.
Wow, John, that was amazing. So much information, and we have questions coming in already. If you are ready.
I'm ready.
The first one that came up was, did you say that the Norway maple was one of those that inhibits other plant growth?
Yes, it is allelopathic.
Okay. And then another question that came in was, I've heard that you plant a pear tree for your grandchildren. Is that true?
I've heard that too. You know, there's a saying, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. So that's not just true for pears, it's true for anything else. You know, I think the saying about planting it for your grandchildren is suggesting that you're not going to see very many pears in your own lifetime. It depends on what age you are. And it might also depend on the variety of pear and the conditions that it's growing in.
Okay. Another question is, can beach plums be grown closer to Boston, Hull in particular, and are there any special conditions?
Yes, they can be grown in any part of the state. Because they grow on the Cape, they sure can handle sandy soil, but as I indicated, they can handle pretty normal soil as well. I work at a place called Triplebrook Farm in Southampton, and there's one growing right outside his house that's just very healthy, and it's nowhere near the Cape.
And another question, could cranberry be grown under blueberries?
I imagine they could.
Okay. All right. And then another one of the questions was, are all of these plants, are they all growable in New England? So there was a few times when you mentioned.
Every plant that I discussed is hardy here in New England.
Okay, because there were some times when you mentioned zones, and sometimes when it's some towns where you couldn't grow some plants based on zones if they were invasive.
That was about the currants and gooseberries, and that was not about the zones. It was about the local ordinances. It's kind of confusing why some towns or municipalities prohibit the growth, the culture, growing these plants, and some allow it. But it had to do with the concerns that some people have about currants and gooseberries being a vector for white pine blister rust disease.
Okay. All right. Were there any other questions? Let's see. Oh, do you have any tips for harvesting from a tallish mulberry tree with branches taller than a ladder?
I often just pick up the fruits that have fallen on the lawn. There they are. They're the easiest to harvest, and they're ripe. They're not likely to be eaten by the birds as much as others. So, your creativity is the limit in terms of harvesting mulberries. But I don't tend to be that ambitious about harvesting mulberries because, as I indicated, it's not the kind of fruit that you're going to bring in, a bushel of mulberries and make a pie or do something like that with them. I just eat them fresh, right out of hand.
All right. Well, I think if there are no more questions from our audience, it's amazing. That's a huge amount of stuff. If you could just tell people one more time, there you are, where they can, one more. What is your most productive fruit or shrub, a fruit, shrub, or tree?
That's a good question. One of the ones that pops up in my mind is the Chinese chestnut, the very first plant that I discussed. Quite productive, and you can think of it as a substitute for wheat. In other words, it's a perennial that wheat, of course, has to be planted every year, and you have to turn the soil and that kind of thing. But Chinese chestnuts keep giving you more and more every year, and it has a similar. It's hard to find. It's hard to grow perennials that will give you a high carbohydrate food, and that's the case for both carbohydrates and protein in that Chinese chestnut. So it's it could be a very valuable tree for sustainability and providing for our diets in the future.
What I really liked at the beginning of your presentation, you pointed out a lot of ways that people could test their soil at home. A lot of sort of these simple approaches to doing things, and sometimes gardeners, I'm not a gardener. I don't know how to do any of this stuff. I don't have a lot of gear. These sort of do-it-yourself at home simple approaches. Once again, can you tell us where we can go on your website to find some of this stuff? You had a ton of links that you showed us, and we've had a lot of requests for your PowerPoint. Where do people go? What's your website again for those who are looking to revisit all that you showed us?
Well, I will say that if you're wanting to view the program again, the Whitman Hanson Community Access will be broadcasting it on more than one occasion. And I believe they'll also make a recording available via YouTube, so you can view it to your heart's content that way. If you have any specific requests, any of the information that just I whizzed right through it, then you wanted me to, you didn't have time to write notes, just go ahead and send me an email message, info@johnroot.net, and invite, and I'll respond however I can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone out there that was watching. This was fantastic. So much information, and we're getting lots of happy gardening, happy landscaping, happy harvesting to everybody out there on what I think may be the first day of spring. If not today, then definitely tomorrow. Not even the way we planned it, just turned out to be this way. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to John Root. Thank you to Paul Watson of Whitman Hanson Community Access and the Whitman Cultural Council, right? Who funded this. Exactly. Thank you so much. And have a good evening to everyone out there. So have a good night, everyone. Thank you.